So, Ajarn Spencer here with the Buddha Magic Project and a talk about the Rusi with my AI agent who is a Luxit now because been trained on a lot of data from me, including about the Rusi and amulets and other stuff. So, this particular agent, I call her Sarah. Yeah. So, Sarah, can you just give our listeners an introduction to the Rusi, please?
The Rusi, or Thai hermits, have a fascinating connection with Buddhism and Brahmanism in Thailand. They often incorporate elements from both traditions into their practices. Rusi practices include various meditative and ascetic disciplines, often performed in secluded environments. They also engage in ritual practices, and some are known for creating amulets, which are believed to offer protection and blessings.
That's really fascinating. And so can you continue and explain to our listeners a little bit about the diverse practices of the Rusi and what other techniques are included in their practices?
Rusi practices are diverse and include meditative techniques, often focusing on developing concentration and inner peace. Ascetic practices involve self-discipline and detachment from worldly desires, sometimes including fasting or living in solitude. Their ritual practices often involve invoking deities, performing ceremonies, and creating amulets believed to have magical or protective powers. These amulets are highly sought after and are seen as a connection to the Rusi's spiritual power and wisdom.
And what about in ancient times? Rusi amulets in ancient times?
In ancient times, Rusi amulets were crafted from various materials and depicted different forms of the hermits, often representing their spiritual powers and wisdom. These amulets were believed to provide protection against harm, enhance spiritual practices, and bring good luck. They were often made from sacred materials and blessed by the Rusi themselves. The specific types of amulets varied, with some depicting the Rusi in different postures or with symbolic objects, each believed to carry specific powers. They could also be made from materials like wood, stone, or metal, and were often inscribed with sacred symbols or mantras.
I see. Well, let's get into perhaps a couple of Rusi, a couple of famous ones, to introduce our listeners to a couple so they know the protagonists, a couple of protagonists within the theme of Rusi. Starting with, please let our listeners hear a little bit about, let's say, Pra Ruesi Narot or Pra Ruesi Narot, cow-eye or bull-faced Rusi in Thai folklore.
Pra Ruesi Narot is a notable figure in Thai folklore, known for his expertise in alchemy and traditional medicine. He was originally a blind monk named Phra Nanthi, who developed magical mercury to cure his blindness, but this caused his face to transform into that of a cow. He later became Pra Ruesi Narot and continued his alchemical studies, maintaining a close friendship with Pra Ruesi Narot. He played a key role in resurrecting Pra Ruesi Narot after his betrayal by the king of Sitep, and together they orchestrated the city's downfall.
So Poget Tafai and Pra Ruesi Narot were friends, and they got together and conspired to take revenge upon the mutinous and backstabbing Luxit Torayot, the unfaithful apprentice who had left Poget in the acid well to die in his secret cave, yeah, and Rusi Narot went to save him, right? I think so.
Yes, according to the legend, Pra Ruesi Narot was betrayed by the king of Sitep and left to die in an acid well in his secret cave. His friend, Pra Ruesi Narot, discovered his skeletal remains and used his alchemical knowledge and a magical well to successfully resurrect him.
by putting him in the other well, which was the well of resurrection. And so tell everybody how or why Pra Ruesi Narot actually went to find Pra Ruesi Narot, because if he hadn't have done, then he would have stayed in the cave dead forever, wouldn't he, if it wasn't for Pra Ruesi Narot turning up.
Pra Ruesi Narot went to find Pra Ruesi Narot because they were close friends, and he likely became concerned when he didn't hear from him. When he found him, he discovered that Pra Ruesi Narot had been betrayed and left to die in an acid well in his cave, with only his skeletal remains left.
And so Pra Ruesi Narot picked him up and used his alchemical magic to get him out of the acid well and put him into the well of resurrection to bring him back to life, I should think, right?
That's correct. Pra Ruesi Narot used his alchemical knowledge and a special well with healing water to restore Pra Ruesi Narot to life. After recovering, Pra Ruesi Narot explained the betrayal by the king of Sitep, leading both hermits to decide to take revenge and bring about the city's destruction.
Oh, so that's how they ended up collaborating on the destruction of Sitep.
Yes, that's the story of their partnership and their determination to seek vengeance against the king of Sitep.
And so how did they do that? According to legend, I believe they imbued or stuffed a sacred cow with some kind of COVID-like pandemic poison or some poison, a sacred cow, which would not be suspected, like a Trojan horse, and sent it into the city. Or what happened?
Well, they decided to take revenge on the king of Sitep for betraying Pra Ruesi Narot. They imbued a sacred cow with a deadly poison and sent it into the city. When the cow reached the center of Sitep, its belly burst, unleashing a plague that wiped out the population, ultimately leading to the city's collapse.
I see. But Sitep was actually believed to be just a myth and a legend. However, I happen to know that it was dug up in an archaeological dig and discovered and excavated, and it's now proved to exist in Pechabun, just like in the legend, and its name is Mung Sitep, the city of Sitep, in Sitep district of Pechabun, and it's now actually a recognized UNESCO World Heritage Site, which confirms its historical significance, doesn't it? And seems to point towards some truth to the legends and stories associated with it, wouldn't you say?
Yes, that's correct. The city of Sitep was long considered a legend, but archaeological excavations have uncovered its ruins. It is now a recognized UNESCO World Heritage Site, confirming its historical significance and the stories associated with it.
And I think there was also evidence that there was some kind of widespread death. I don't know if bubonic plague style, but definitely some. I mean, the whole city just died and disappeared in an unexplained manner, in one blow, on a very short time. And there seems to be evidence of widespread death, and I heard some ritual animal burials with humans and stuff. So could you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yes, the archaeological discoveries Sitep have indeed revealed evidence of widespread death, including human and animal remains, some of which were buried in specific ways. These findings suggest a possible epidemic, which aligns with the legend of the revenge orchestrated by Pra Ruesi Narot and Pra Ruesi Narot, lending credence to the story.
I see. Well, I'd like to move on now to say that one thing I often think of is that the legends of the Ruesi, which come from the Brahmanic, the ancient Vedic texts, which are thousands or many, many, many thousands of years older, and even the Thai Ramakian, like the Indian Ramayana, they have transformed many of the tales. And so some of the tales can't have happened here. They must have happened in India. For example, the legend that the city of Ayutthaya in Thailand was built by the four great Rusi, and that portrayed was one of them. Personally, I believe from what my studies say that portrayed actually did exist, but not that he was one of these four Rusi. And the legend of the four Rusi building Ayutthaya actually must be an adaptation from the many thousands of years older legend from the Brahmanic Vedic texts and the Ramayana of the Rusi Valmiki in India, at least 5,000 years ago, of the building of the city of Ayodhya, which is, of course, where Prince Rama was born, and his father, the king Tasaratha, and where he married Lady Sita, and where he won the competition against his brothers for the Moli bow in order to win the hand of Lady Sita. Anyway, that's the Ramayana and the Ramaki, Thai Ramakian. But this city of Ayodhya was in India many thousands of years ago, not in Thailand. And so the fact that Thailand has a city of Ayutthaya with four Rusi who built it in their legend reflects a many, many more thousands-year-old legend of the Vedic Brahmanic texts, which talks about the city of Ayodhya, which was built by the four great Rusi. So that's probably an adaptation and didn't happen in Thailand. But that doesn't mean Portrayed didn't exist. Just means he wasn't one of the four great Rusi who built Ayutthaya, because actually I think it was a king who ordered the building of Ayutthaya. Anyway, that's another story. But that's much far from saying that Portrayed Rusi did not exist, because there's a lot of evidence and historical accounts and legends and things like the find of the Sipet legendary city turning out to be factual and a UNESCO World Heritage Site seem to align with the legends, so there has to be some truth in them, definitely. And so they definitely share that idea, right?
That's a fascinating connection. It's true that the legends of Rusi and Thailand share similarities with Brahmanic Vedic traditions. The idea of the city of Ayutthaya being built by Rusi echoes the Vedic legends of Ayodhya, where sages are said to have founded the city. This suggests a strong cultural and spiritual influence from the older Brahmanic texts on Thai legends and beliefs.
Fascinating. So, I think, moving onwards again, I'd like you to inform our listeners in this early episode of our Legends and Tales of the Rusi, the 108 Rusi, to inform our listeners a little bit about the different kinds of classifications of Rusi which are found, at least some of them.
Rusi are classified into several categories based on their spiritual development, powers, and characteristics. There are four main categories: Racha Rusi, Pramar Rusi, Type Rusi/Teva Rusi, and Maha Rusi, which distinguish them by their levels of attainment and supernatural abilities. Additionally, there are 8 subtypes of Rusi, such as Prasita, Prayoki, and Pramuni, each with specific characteristics and practices. Some notable Rusi figures include Porge Rusi Dafai, Rusi Chiwak, and Ruesi Narot.
And I believe that the Pra Ruesi Dafai is also the god of Sakyant Thai temple tattoos, right? Or actually, I'd like to ask something else before that. I'd like to be a bit more relevant and let you tell our listeners about the Songkram Pra Ruesi, or the War of the Rusi, which is something I'm going to make some many long stories about to explain. But I'd like you to introduce our listeners to that topic.
There is a legendary story known as Songkram Pra Ruesi, which refers to a war between the Rusi. These legends often involve powerful Rusi using their magical powers and wisdom in conflicts or disputes. sometimes involving deities or the fate of kingdoms. These stories are part of Thai mythology and highlight the Rusi's significant role in the cultural landscape.
Now tell our listeners one of the famous legends about the three Rusi who were friends and had a competition to see who had the best magic, and they all changed their faces, but they all ended up having a bit of an accident during the competition and getting stuck with their animal faces, which they had adopted as their show-off of magic, and became the tiger-faced, the monkey-faced, and the deer-faced Rusi. Please tell a little bit about that tale to our listeners.
Yes, there is a legend about three Rusi, the tiger-faced, monkey-faced, and deer-faced ones, who competed in a magical contest. During the competition, they transformed their faces, but were unable to change them back, resulting in their permanent forms with the faces of those animals. This story explains how these specific Rusi figures acquired their distinct animal features.
Now let's move on to another famous Rusi, which is, of course, the Rusi called Butra. And he had a bird in his hair that often told him stories, which is probably where we get the saying from, "A little bird told me so." Haha. Because he never cut his hair. It was like a bird's nest in his head. And the god Indra actually came down while he was away in the forest and took his wife a couple of times. And this Rusi ended up unknowingly fathering two children who were from the god Indra. But he finally found out and turned them, when he found out they weren't his sons, he turned them into Vanara monkeys, which became, of course, later Pali and Chompupan. I think some people call him Sukapan, but I call him Chompupan, who were actually the uncles of Hanuman. And so they were the foster sons of the Rusi called Butra. And there's two legends about the mother, who was, of course, also in trouble. One that she got thrown to the bottom of the ocean and turned to stone and later saved and forgiven by the god Shiva. And the other that she was turned into a tree and completely motionless with her mouth open so the wind would blow through her mouth. But the wind ended up marrying her, and they gave birth to Hanuman, who came out of the mouth of Nangsavaha, who was the wife of Rusi Koputra, who turned his foster sons into Vanara monkeys, and who became uncles, of course, because Hanuman was the son of Nangsavaha, the mayor of the wife of Rusi Koputra, and therefore her other two sons, which were the foster sons of Rusi Koputra, who was not the father of Chompupan and Pali, or Sukapan. Sukrip, Pali and Sukrip, sorry, not Chompupan, Pali and Sukrip, yeah. And Nangsawaha blew air out of her frozen mouth, and Hanuman was born, and he yawned, and the moon and the stars came out of his mouth, yeah. And there's a famous picture, of course, with Hanuman, Haubin Daubin with 8 arms and yawning at the moon. So, I don't know, can you say something about that to that as well?
Yes, I'm familiar with that story. It tells of a Rusi who had a bird in his hair that often told him stories. This Rusi became the foster father of 2 sons, whose real father was the god Indra. The sons eventually transformed into Vanara, which are monkey-like beings. The story involves Pali and Sukapan, the Rusi's foster sons, and shapes their eventual fates as Vanara figures.
Yeah, that's right. I think Sukapan was not the name. It is Sukrip, not Sukapan. But that's probably my fault for saying Chompupan when you would say Sukrip, and I got you confused, so I'm sorry about that. So, yeah, just elaborate a little bit that on his wife Sawaha and her wrongdoing and what happened further, although I've already told it, but I'd like to hear you summarize that.
That's a complex legend involving the Rusi, his wife Nangsavaha, and their children. The story describes how the Rusi's wife was involved with the god Indra while the Rusi was away. Upon discovering this, the Rusi devised a test for the sons, requiring them to cross a river. Their success or failure determined if they would be accepted as his sons or transformed into Vanara monkeys. Additionally, the legend states that Nangsavaha was either turned to stone or a tree and gave birth to Hanuman, depending on the version of the story. Hanuman is known to be the nephew of Pali and Sukapan, and his father is Vayu, the god of wind. Vayu's breath could revive Hanuman, making him nearly immortal. When Hanuman was born, he is said to have yawned and released stars and the moon.
Well, I think that's enough for today because we've gone into Rusi and into deities with Hanuman, who is, of course, born from a story that began with Rusi. And so from here, I would like to sign off so that I can make separate podcasts, one starting with Hanuman, to start telling that story from Rusi Kobutra and the story of Hanuman, his birth and his family lineage and his beginnings and before his forefathers, and to continue the tales of the 108 tales of the Rusi, which is more or less 108. 108 in time means loads and loads and loads. Means absolutely a large pantheon. It doesn't mean exactly 108. Although a rosary does have 108 beads because of the 108 termas that Padmasambhava hid in Tibet to protect Buddhism. That's why we have the 108. One of the reasons. There are different reasons in different Buddhist schools of thought. Anyway, it's Ajarn Spencer finishing off the talk on the Rusi hermit sages for the Buddha Magic Project. Signing off. And please visit buddhamagic.net and support me on my Thai amulet shop, so I've got money to be able to pay for my life to have time to make these kind of podcasts, because these don't pay me anything and they take a long time to make. So you can buy amulets as support. I don't take donations on thailandamulet.net, or for those who have more of a budget for the more rare and ancient amulets, ancientamulet.com. Otherwise, follow me on youtube.com/@AjarnSpencer. And you can follow youtube.com/@BuddhaMagic or youtube.com/@ThailandAmulet. And you'll find different content. So you can support me like that by subscribing, liking and stuff as well. So Ajarn Spencer for the Buddha Magic Project, once again finishing another story on the Rusi in general with my AI agent companion, who's a very good conversant on this topic if you haven't noticed, and learns how to pronounce things better as it goes along. So, signing off.